Live in a constant state of fear and misery. No, you're me anymore. And live in a constant state of fear and misery. No, you're me, no, you're me, no, 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 no. Live in a constant state of fear and misery. No, you're me anymore.
Hello, everybody. So today is, Wednesday? Yeah, Wednesday, March 27th. And we're bringing you Block Digest 168 at block height 569,046. So what's going on, guys?
Oh, yeah. It's back and forth. Wednesday, Sunday. Which day is it? They've both been beautiful days. So another beautiful day, man. How's it going with you guys?
It is too. Jennings' battery's dead right now, unfortunately, but she might get charged later. How are you, Monkey?
Well, feeling strange. I woke up at an hour befitting a normal human being, and I don't feel quite like myself.
You're not used to getting some sleep and waking up again? You're still used to just staying up all the time?
Mm-hmm. Alrighty. Well, I guess Janine's power is back, so she should be joining us in a second.
Woohoo!
Alrighty. So, late start, I guess. Let's dive right into it. So we have pretty much a 3-chunk dealing with Bitmain right here at the beginning. And really, first off, I just want to take a second and give a shout out to Wolfie Zhao at CoinDesk, who pretty much, from my point of view, seems to be one of the only people at that complete fucking rag who actually consistently does real reporting, real journalism with actual factual information. And so I just want to say thank you for being the exception to the giant steaming pile of shit that usually gets published on CoinDesk. But that said, Bitmain is pretty much really kind of contradicting itself and shifting back around in the other direction as opposed to the kind of changes they've been going through over the last year. And we've seen since they started publishing transparency reports on how much hash rate that they've been operating, that it's been drastically shrinking over the last year or two, both in terms of overall revenue from the company as well as how much, obviously, hash rate they're operating. And we've seen from 2017 around 20% of the revenue being from them mining themselves 2015. 2017, it dropped to around 8% of their revenue. And last year in 2018, just 3% of their revenue or thereabouts was from actually mining themselves. And we've seen a matching inverse increase in the amount of their revenue that was coming from actually selling their own hardware to consumers. But very recently, we covered a kind of mining boom developing in southwestern China in the Sichuan and the Yunnan provinces, with the rainy season coming up in May, with the involved drop in electricity prices due to the excess hydropower available, and a huge rush of people moving in to set up their mining equipment in data centers set up there to host it. Well, Bitmain is apparently moving to do the exact same thing and is planning to deploy 200,000 of its own units in the provinces around May. when the power becomes available and prices start dropping. And they're already 2 months ahead of that, starting to negotiate with the data center operators for hosting and costs. And there's also one detail here I think is kind of interesting, is that one of the sources Wolfie was using to get this information is claiming that most of the equipment they're going to be setting up is actually their S11s and S15s, their new 7 nanometer chips, which is really kind of interesting given that a lot of the information we've had leaked from Bitmain is that the production runs for actual mining devices that were produced from these chips was ridiculously low, like only 1,000 or something that looked pretty much just like a PR attempt to salvage a reputation given the year of unbelievably shady shit that they've been caught doing, the bad press from how the IPO is going, their financial losses, and so on. And if this report is accurate, this would indicate that the amount of machines they actually produced versus what they sold to consumers is massively greater than what seemed to be the total production amount based on what they've actually sold to retail consumers. And so that would also kind of imply that it was really a calculated thing to produce these devices in this quantity and actually hold on to most of them themselves to operate themselves. And so really this is kind of just interesting because when you look at the overall situation going on with this rush to these provinces in China, one of the things that was notably different than in the past was the excess of used hardware on the market that was kind of just shifting the entire dynamics of the ASIC market, where people actually interested in operating, mining equipment, they're not going to companies like Bitmain to buy them new because they're just so cheap used that with low electricity prices, even used equipment can still be very profitable. And when you look at the cost dropping to around like 2 or 3 cents per kilowatt hour, based on a profitability index from F2 Pool, you could be looking at around $1.30 of profit per machine a day for old S9s, $2.24 for the S11s, and $3.38 for the S15s. And even assuming that all of the machines Bitmain is planning to operate, 200,000 S9s would give you $7.7 million in profit per month. And the source Wolfie's talked to is indicated that most of this is going to be S11s and S15s, which are a little more power effective and powerful than the old S9s. And so it's really kind of indicating that, Bitmain might not actually be hit as hard by this shift in market dynamic where a lot of people are moving towards buying used older equipment because it can still be profitable with lower electricity prices, because they've apparently kind of accounted for that ahead of time and planned out this entire setup and negotiations where they're going to be deploying a bulk of this equipment to operate for themselves. And, the one thing I do want to note here is Bitmain has around 11 mining farms located in Sichuan, Xinjiang, and Inner Mongolia with the capacity to store all this themselves, but they're looking for, hosting space in other people's data centers. So they're already pretty much full up in the farms that they operate themselves with either their own equipment or hosting other people's equipment. And so it's really like they've had all this equipment sitting around apparently, but even with the situation they're in as far as the scale of the operation, they were not capable of actually deploying and operating this with their own infrastructure. So it's, looking at this isn't really like a simple, this is bad for Bitmain or good for Bitmain or bad for Bitcoin or good for Bitcoin. It's really showing all of the different complex variables that go into being a company in this aspect of the ecosystem. Like, they've had to completely about face in a shift that they've been going through for 2 years or so now, where they're mining less and less themselves to kind of account for this shift in market dynamics, where new equipment directly from a producer isn't as valuable or sought after as it used to be. And in reversing that shift, they've actually had to go around and try to find other people's infrastructure to operate this machinery, because even their own, as a company of this size, isn't enough to host and operate and power this many machines. And so like the more time goes on, like the more cutthroat like the entire mining ecosystem is getting. And even for a company the size of Bitmain that's still not been beaten down by all of the missteps they've taken over the last 2 years, is kind of having to be very agile and adaptive to continue moving here.
Yeah, man. Bitmain back in the news. I mean, they never really left the news, have they, man? It's been like this constant, year-long, like multi-pronged bad decision making that, just winds to them trying to figure out a way to, get things back in order. I mean, they've talked about removing Jahan from the board. I mean, have they already done that? Do we know that? Have they removed Jahan yet?
We're gonna be touching on that a little bit in the next two, but he's no longer the operational CEO.
Well, yeah, man, it makes me wonder, like you're saying, they had all this supply on reserve that they could set up their own farms. They made some cells, but the greater percentage was held down. And then I imagine they did something similar with the S9 market. Maybe that's where it's like they couldn't get rid of the liquidity of Bcash because they needed to just like keep propping that up. And so they could get rid of the hardware. Because, I know, I've seen some people here locally that got some cheap hardware, and they're mining again at a profit. So, I guess this is just another sign of them just fledging around trying to figure out what to do. And I imagine it's going to be hard with these S15 and S11s. They're not quite as efficient. I mean, so it's a headache for them.
Yeah, I mean, like this, depending on what the actual makeup of like their overall equipment they're deploying is, like they could wind up adding like almost 4 exahashes to the overall Bitcoin network. And I mean, that's really at least the last time I checked, as much as the entire Bcash network was before the split into ABC and SV. And it's, I really think at this point in time, like it's just not really practical for anybody to really attack the network with hash rate. I mean, like just that's only a few percentage of the mining equipment that's running the overall network, and they've had to pretty much look completely outside of the company for places to host and power this. And even that dynamic is totally dependent on seasonal excess power in an area specifically known for having a lot of surplus hydropower because of just a lack of infrastructure connecting that to the national power grid. And it's like, really, when it comes down to it, like if some new player wants to come in and really do something like that, like where are they going to get the electricity from? Like you're going to have to source at least half of the electrical output of an entire small country.
Yeah, I mean, these things are getting competitive between big players, and so you come in with as much as you got, and it's still as little as that whenever it comes to the network. But I mean, that's where Yeah, I mean, we're not there yet, but I always worry about the possibility of, like, cyber attacks on these areas that are hosting big farms, and then other areas build up with miners we didn't know about. It's the game theory doesn't stop.
But Janine, Nopara, anything to toss in here?
Janine, you want to give us a mic check? How you doing today?
Hello.
Good to hear from you. All right, so what else was going on with Bitmain?
So yesterday, their IPO filing has officially lapsed. So at this point, they would have to completely restart and refile and go through the initial period. And at least for this go around, it's pretty much done. Like, this is the end of this IPO. It's not happening based on this filing. And really, given the fact that this one has lapsed without any forward motion into the next phases of a listing, I don't really see another attempt happening anytime soon until something very material changes, both with Bitmain's financial situation and just the overall, crypto market. Like, those were really the two reasons that no forward progress was made. I mean, as the market took a huge downturn, that pretty much hurt all of the businesses in this space producing mining equipment for things. And that really showed in their financials. I mean, let alone the fact that during the entire build up to the filing, I mean, like, Bitmain was pretty much committing outright fraud. Like, they were claiming that they had received investment from major tech companies in China that didn't give them a dime. So they were misrepresenting their entire investor makeup to try and incentivize people to invest pre-IPO. That was completely fraudulent. Their entire accounting practice for their cryptocurrency holdings was manipulated in that they were marking its fiat value not at the current market value, but the value at the time that they actually acquired it. And that's going to take a lot of substantial change and indications of a much more healthy and frankly just not shady as fuck business practices before I think the Hong Kong exchange would even consider trying to take another filing and progressing it to the next steps of things. But that said, I think I'm going to kind of slide along into the next one. Is it kind of ties in with the Bitcoin Magazine article about the IPO filing expiring. But Bitmain also yesterday released a blog post titled 2019's focus is on customers. And they pretty much tried to downplay the entire history of the IPO filing process. The first thing they mentioned was that according to Frost & Sullivan, they are the second largest chip design company in China that doesn't have its own fab plants, as if that really means anything in the greater context of its situation as a company, and tried to spin the entire failed IPO application as, well, it brought a lot more transparency to the company, as if that means anything, except it brought a huge degree of transparency to the unbelievably duplicitous, manipulative, and fraudulent business practices that they engaged in attempt to paint themselves in a positive light during the entire IPO process, which was pretty much them just scrambling desperately to acquire more operating capital, because pretty much since Bcash was created, they have just made one dumb business decision after the other that has wrecked them to the tune of almost $1 billion in losses so far, at least from the financial figures that have been publicly declared. And
sorry, I thought you finished. Go ahead.
no, but you know, and they're pretty much just trying to spin everything that has gone wrong with them as some kind of positive light, such as the entire dismantling of whole divisions and subsidiaries during the buckling down and streamlining after their financial situation became publicly known. And really, like, buried in here are two things I want to kind of point out here. First of all, obviously, is that they've confirmed explicitly that Jihan Wu and McCree Zan have stepped down from the role of CEO, and Mr. Haoshou Wang has been appointed CEO as of now. He previously led a few different divisions in the company, although they don't explicitly say which ones. And you know, that's really not anything new. That's something we've had leaked multiple times. But the real interesting thing, I think, is confirmation of something I have been speculating on for more than a year, since they started getting involved in ASICs for deep learning. They have signed a cooperation agreement with the Fuzhou municipal government in the Fujian province, which is pretty much right directly west of Taiwan on the coast. The China Mobile Hangzhou Research and Development Center and China Unicom Network Technology Research Institute to deploy their ASICs for deep learning. So they have just signed a cooperational agreement with a city government in a capital of a very large coastal province to start deploying ASICs for deep learning. They are starting to pretty much form partnerships with aspects of the Chinese government to deploy ASICs for AI. And what are they using AI for? Surveillance, automated law enforcement, augmented tools for law enforcement, in a country that literally just recently amended their constitution to effectively guarantee that any rival political party to the Communist Party is explicitly unconstitutional. So that this is pretty much direct confirmation out of their own mouth that the entire end goal of their AI research and product line is to start partnering with the government and deploy it for all kinds of nasty totalitarian dystopian purposes. And you know, I think the real telling thing here is going to be, how does Bitmain's financial situation develop over the next year or two? Because by all rights, they should be barreling into bankruptcy in the next year or two. They are deeply in debt with their suppliers who actually fab their chips for their products. They have committed multiple acts of fraud in an attempt to be listed as a publicly traded company on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, and have completely fucked up their business with stupid decisions to try and hold up one of the worst shit coins out there to the tune of almost $1 billion in losses. So if they don't wind up falling into bankruptcy in the next year or two, you have to sit there and wonder why. And where is the money to prevent that coming from, if that's how things play out in the near future? That was done.
So, do you think it was Bitmain launched because before they fucked up, or they fucked up because they launched it? What do you think?
Oh, I mean, it's completely certain it was launching Bcash. Like that was what fucked everything up. Sunk all of their capital into it, like almost bankrupted themselves.
But what if they fucked up already, and then they had no other chance but to, because the money they are spending, they are working with is huge. So they might had no other chance but to launch Bcash and try to monopolize the whole Bitcoin industry. Of course, they did not succeed, so now they failed. Maybe that was their attempt to come out of the deep shit they were in.
No, they were doing phenomenally. Like they were operating around 10% of their revenue was coming from self-mining. They were amassing massive amounts of Bitcoin. They were sitting on a shit ton of cash in terms of capital. They were just undeniably the dominant ASIC manufacturer and retail seller. They were doing massive volume on that. They were in an awesome position before Bcash. Like they were literally in such a great position that they were funding other companies in the space. Like it was nothing.
I'll agree to that, man. That was like their time in history. But I mean, like, I'm just thinking back, that was a lot of like off the grid farms through backdoor contracts with who knows affiliates that might have had some government ties that, he got roped in early on with some bad figures in the government. And I don't know if roped in is even the way to say it. I mean, maybe just a deal was made way back then. And the whole point was to try and at least make sure that they could surveil the system. I don't know. That's just a speculative point.
But it was hands down, like they were doing phenomenally well before they launched Bcash, and it just completely fucked them up. They started liquidating their Bitcoin. They started only selling their hardware for Bcash, so they were giving up a shit ton of their fiat revenue as people acquired ASICs that way. Like from that point on, they went from being a very well off, well operated company, a very profitable company, to just making the most idiotic business decisions possible, and wound up with over 1 million Bcash, almost none of their Bitcoin reserves, and were naturally pushed into a market where their equipment was less desirable just because of the overall downturn and the used market developing. Like they fucked themselves with that completely.
Without a doubt, that was a bad bet. I mean, part of that was this whole idea of like them trying to preserve their ASIC boost efficiency and, not wanting to kowtow towards this idea that, SegWit was the better route. Or, I don't know, but it certainly was a bad decision. That was kind of the death nail. I mean, stuck with Bcash, and you got to somehow pull out all these parties for this possible IPO you're doing, which that fell apart. I mean, yeah, it's I don't know when to say like the bad decision making started, but for sure that was the death nail.
But I guess any last input on this one? Yay, nay?
Nope. What's going on with LocalBitcoins?
Yeah, so this is kind of two stories. One is about LocalBitcoins, and the other is clarifying what people are associating with this update, which is kind of murky. So on March 25th, LocalBitcoins announced that due to a newly approved proposal by the Finnish parliament regarding, quote, detecting and preventing money laundering and terrorist financing, virtual currency services will henceforth be supervised by the Financial Supervisory Authority of Finland, which will come into full effect later this year in November 2019. And they claim this will, quote, create a legal status for crypto assets, which should improve significantly Bitcoin's standing as a viable and legit financial network. Now, if that wasn't bullshit enough, we all know it's bullshit. For some reason, they decided to announce this 1 week after they have already launched, quote, a new account registration process where users can verify basic information already during sign up, making it easier for there's a lot of mistakes in this post, newcomers to find trading partners from day one, and increasing the number of suitable customers to advertisers, who knows what that means, as well as inhibiting the creation of illegitimate accounts, end quote. And so they say that they will create a separate verification process for corporate accounts and make further announcements about relevant changes at a later date. But this all seems very hastily put together. Now, according to their statement, they are doing this to comply with Finland's new rules, as their base of operation is Helsinki, Finland. But there's also a broader EU-wide directive that will be affecting cryptocurrency exchanges and custodial wallets within the next year or two. And it's a bit confusing because there are a bunch of articles that were put out around this policy change from LocalBitcoins that say it was because of the EU directive, but the EU directive is not actually cited in their blog post. Now, it's entirely possible that Finland's proposal was their way of complying with that directive, but LocalBitcoins does not cite it specifically. For some reason, all of these articles want to skate over that. The final version of the EU directive about, quote, the prevention of the use of the financial system for the purposes of money laundering or terrorist financing, or 5AMLD for short, was approved by the EU Parliament way back in April 2018. And I think it doesn't officially come into effect until 2020 even. It's very confusing. Like, there's a bunch of even compliance people who are confused about what the date of effect is for that. But yes, Finland's proposal appears to have been approved in lieu of becoming compliant with that directive early on. So I guess they expect it to be carried out. What I really hate about most of the articles published over the last couple of days regarding this matter is the complete absence of nuance and clarification. So first of all, the EU directive specifically focuses on, quote, exchange services between virtual currencies and fiat currencies, as well as custodial wallet providers. This does not apply to non-custodial wallets. And yet a bunch of these articles are saying things like, anonymous Bitcoin buying and selling is no more. LocalBitcoins, one of the last places to offer such a service, is officially changing its policy after receiving pressure from the European Union, blah, blah, blah. This is the first sentence in the Be in Crypto article that's listed in the video description. But yeah, that is wrong. If you look at the Hacker Noon article that I linked, it specifically, and this was way back in May of 2018, so we've known about this for a while. It specifically says that this does not apply to non-custodial wallets. So if you're holding your crypto, your Bitcoin in a wallet where you control the keys, then you are fine. They will not be forced to KYC you. So hardware wallets, non-custodial mobile wallets, blah, 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 all of those are fine. It is the custodial exchanges and wallets that will be affected by this. And it's like, you know, they have a bunch of recommendations for that, but they don't really define their terms properly, but it's very clear that they're focusing on custodial wallets. Like, I've heard a bunch of people in the last couple of weeks who should know better, who've been saying, oh no, this affects all wallets. It's like, no, it very clearly says exchanges and custodial wallets. Like, I don't know why it's so difficult. And we've known about this for more than a year now, almost a year. And so that really bugs me. And the other part of the directive is that they say that, like, you know, that it's not about non-custodial wallets because they say on page 7, this will not entirely address the issue of anonymity attached to virtual currency transactions, as a large part of the virtual currency environment will remain anonymous because users can also transact without such providers. To combat the risks related to anonymity, National Financial Intelligence Units, FIUs, should be able to obtain information allowing them to associate virtual currency addresses to the identity of the owner of virtual currency. In addition, the possibility to allow users to self-declare to designated authorities on a voluntary basis should be further assessed. So this is not something that was directly addressed or put into law as part of this directive. This is a comment they made saying this will not affect a broad part of the virtual currency environment, but they are focusing on custodial exchanges and wallets. So yeah, be prepared, because apparently their next idea is to further de-anonymize and put people at risk by trying to obtain information about associated addresses with identities. So yeah, they want to fuck up your privacy, but that doesn't mean they're doing that with this directive. That's just one of their really great future ideas that we'll have to deal with at a later date. But not honestly surprised about the local Bitcoin stuff, because everyone knows they're not a decentralized exchange. They're basically they're not a decentralized exchange in the sense that they're not like Bisq. They're basically a meeting place for people to meet online and then arrange to meet in person. So no surprise. And I think they also run like an escrow wallet. And so obviously if they're running that and they're controlling some of the keys, I mean, I don't need, does anyone know? Because if they're running an escrow service, presumably they're not holding all of the keys, or they are holding all of the keys when you use their exchange service.
We need to get Raw on here as far as their escrow. Imagine that they would be holding that.
Because like there's two possibilities. Either they have an escrow system where you control one of the keys, in the sense then it's not really a custodial exchange, because escrow is one of those gray areas where it's not custodial and it's not completely, non-custodial.
It's a centralized thing. They have all the keys.
Okay, yeah. So in that case, obviously, local Bitcoins would be affected by this kind of directive. And of course, instead of, holding on to their principles and trying to fight it, they decided, no, please take us over and compromise all of our users' privacy, because that's great. So yeah, local Bitcoins, go away. Don't care about you anymore.
They should just reincorporate in the US or somewhere outside of the EU. Like FinCEN has already declared that like escrow services are not money service businesses.
But clearly they don't want to do that because, probably they've had to deal with a lot of scrutiny from financial regulators for a long time, because they were one of the most popular services for that. Who knows if that's going to change, but yeah, they're not going to put any effort into that as far as we can see. They're like, no, we're going to be first to get fucked.
This is scary.
Yeah, I just think about the same thing like you were saying, Shinobi. I wonder how come these guys don't just incorporate somewhere else? But I guess, somebody else will come along and do that. Somebody else will start a different form of local Bitcoins in a favorable jurisdiction.
So changing the place where you are incorporated in is very difficult. And if you create a company in a country and you stay there, no one's gonna look at you. But if you create a company in a country, you get bigger, and then you want to change country, then that's when all the tax offices and everyone starts to look at your company. So anyway, that's one thing there. And the other thing I totally forgot, so go ahead.
Well, how about you just start a new company, shut the old one down, and sell the user data and transfer it?
Well, I didn't look at the entire letter of the directive, but I assume that this will apply to companies that are servicing Europeans, not just companies based in Europe, but I don't know. So if they wanted to keep their European market, maybe that's too precious to them, and so they'd rather give up their principles.
Well, I'll leave. After Article 13 passed, this is a pointless game. Europeans, sorry, but you guys can just live in a world without all the fun things. And if you want to get pissed about that, get pissed at your retarded government.
I'm sure there'll still be some people trying to get access to the service.
Yeah, speaking of Article 13, I saw a hilarious, I don't know, it might have been from The Onion, but I saw a statement from the Federation of Telephones or something, or telegraphs, and they were like, this is such a great thing. And they have, I don't know, they're part of the record industry about Article 13. That was hilarious because it's like, wow, you guys are old.
Is Article 13 the one that says you can't make a meme?
You can't repost any kind of copyrighted material ever. And part of the thing is well, all right, let's wrap this tangent up quick. But pretty much a company that can let users post things needs to take a best effort to preemptively buy licenses for any content that a user could possibly post. So pretty much if you can post text, pictures, video, and audio, that company has to buy a license for every piece of fucking media on the planet Earth.
Wow. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I've seen some people upset about that, but I haven't really had the time to look into it. I mean, I've seen some pretty funny drawn memes, I guess, because they don't want to take some copyrighted piece of an image or something in order to actually do it. So I guess that's why they're all just drawing it. Man, that's crazy that they're doing that.
Yep, everybody should join me in harassing the shit out of the EU Parliament account on Twitter until you get blocked. First one to get blocked wins.
All right, yeah. So going back off that tangent, yeah, I guess we'll probably see some people, like build out a different platform than LocalBitcoins, but similar to it in another jurisdiction. I mean, like right when Shapeshift went the KYC route, they lost like all their volume, and other competitors started trying to take that, take that market.
The problem with that is that it needs a network effect from the beginning. And when Orbitz or Mycelium started to do the local trader, right? That was it, I think. Even they didn't have any network effect, but Mycelium was dominating the mobile wallet industry at that time. So I'm not that hopeful about that, actually.
I saw that mycelium thing. We'll see how it goes. But there's not any more on that. What's going on with WhatsApp?
Well, wait, so a really quick thing about Mycelium. I don't use mobile wallets, so I've never used them, but I saw a thread a few days ago. It was more commentary on the whole Samurai Wallet, Jonas Schnelly debacle. And apparently Mycelium uses your private key to register, like with their service or something. That is completely insane.
Why?
Yeah.
Why?
I don't even know. It was just one of the things he was like, let me see. It was a guy.
Why is that insane? That's probably the most secure way to do that. If you can't get the guy's key, then you can't impersonate them or like attempt to pretend to be them.
But wait, what? Like,
yeah, it ties to your wallet, right? You don't have to generate a new PGPK, for example, or whatever, that and keep that safe.
No, not their public key, their private key. The private key gets sent to them. That's what I meant.
Are you sure it gets sent and you don't just
that looks something? Really unbelievable.
I've heard some bad things about their structure.
I mean, I will check the thread right now and read word for word what he got from there.
Come back. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so this is, where is it? Edge wallet, where is it? Okay, come back to it.
Yeah, let's come back to it. I'm very interested.
All right, yeah. Well, I mean, we're talking about another app in the next story anyway, another wallet. So let's just get into it, the WhatsApp wallet.
Yeah, so this is something that was probably inevitable. I mean, it's like things like this are going to exist. There's always going to be a class of users who will prefer to use this or are incapable of using something else. But a company, Woobit, and there really are not that many concrete details about the architecture here so far, is pretty much creating a Bitcoin wallet for dummies that would plug in through an API to pretty much your standard chat apps, WhatsApp, Telegram, SMS. I mean, like in all honesty, this is pretty much like that that nonsense fucking Bcash wallet that was using SMS messages that Mr. Gigolo was pushing a while back, where pretty much sending Bitcoin between people would effectively just be messaging the wallet account over whatever messaging app you're using and typing something like send 0.05 BTC to John, and it would shuffle things around in the account. Now, I mean, this obviously by nature has to be entirely custodial. And depending on what you're actually using to interact with it, is very likely going to tie an actual identity to it, especially if you're using an actual phone number for SMS services. So this pretty much is just a centralized bank, I guess you could say, for Bitcoin to send around in a way where people don't have to in any way at all consider any of the mechanisms that actually facilitate Bitcoin working in the first place. And obviously the privacy is pretty much non-existent because the operators of this service are going to see everything that everyone has, everything that somebody sends to somebody else. And there's absolutely no details or clarity on how this will actually interact with other actual Bitcoin wallets. So what the withdrawal process is like, whether this would actually enable you to send to an external actual Bitcoin wallet. And, you know, it's really the exact opposite of how I would like to see people interact with Bitcoin. But I mean, this kind of shit is going to happen. People are going to use it. And really the only question here is whether or not something like this can actually continue functioning in a real open access way, where all you do is just make a WhatsApp account, sign up with this thing, and that's it. Or whether things like this will inevitably get drawn into the exact kinds of regulations that are forcing massive shifts with local Bitcoin. Like, will something like this be able to continue operating without forcing people to go through extensive identity verification, having all of their activity put through thorough monitoring and analysis? And, you know, if it can, obviously this isn't the best way for people to be interacting with Bitcoin, but it would be something if it's literally just as simple as opening an account through your message app and you're going. But this would be a very disastrous thing if things like this caught on in a wide way and started being subjected to the exact same kinds of requirements that having a legacy bank account would be. And so it's really just a matter of whether or not that happens.
So WhatsApp is end-to-end encrypted, right?
Yes, but this would function in a similar way to ChangeTip. Like, it's not actually integrated into WhatsApp itself, and it's not actually sending Bitcoin transactions. This would just be an account system where you message the bot or API that Woolbit's functioning on and just tell them to move this money to this person's account. So like this is an entirely like centralized top layer.
Oh, maybe they implemented Xiaomi and eCash finally. No?
I highly doubt
Bitcoin eliminated Xiaomi and eCash.
That would make a little too much sense. I mean, it does put at least like you're saying, I mean, some Bitcoin functionality into a lot of people's hands, but you know, it's just another custodial KYC service. It's something that's open for censorship. It's not really Bitcoin, but I mean, it's interesting that a lot of people that like WhatsApp that maybe just tangentially heard about Bitcoin might think a little bit more about it now.
I mean, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if it was not a KYC anal probing to use this. Like if I literally just make a WhatsApp account, like ping this bot and now I have a Bitcoin account, like that's things could be a lot worse. Like I mean it's this is like part of the thing with Bitcoin, that it's like this is beyond people's control. Like if people want to use Bitcoin like this, they're going to, and there's nothing you can do to stop them. It's just the question is here, is this actually going to be something that enables open access to things people didn't have before? Or is this going to turn into, where's your ID card? We need to verify your identity. Where is your money coming from and going? And if it goes the first way, I mean, yeah, it's not good, but it could be a lot worse. If it goes the second way, then it's not going to actually change anything. It's not going to give people financial services that already can't have them because of all of the requirements for shit like this.
Yeah, it's not the best thing. I mean, for sure, it would be great if everybody could sort of figure out a way to actually use Bitcoin the way it was intended to, and we can sort of create the system where it's a lot more of a free market and people get to decide what they want to do, and it'd be great. But yeah, it's just these things are easy and people opt into these things. Like as much as we push back on Coinbase, and all the time there's a lot of people that still use its service and like this idea of a Bitcoin bank, and it's just yeah, that's a fact. But I mean, that option will still be there, just like parallel. I mean, people can learn over time and they can figure out a way to build out the proper solutions.
Anyway, we can speculate all day long about this, but let's go to some more exciting topic. What's happened with Mycelium, Janine?
You got that quote?
Yeah. So this is for the Mycelium local trader application, which I've never even heard of, but I mean, I assume it's something else from their wallet. And it says on that page, under the privacy section, they say they use your Bitcoin private key for registration and authentication with Mycelium servers. The only information retained, of course, who knows what they do retain and don't retain. The only information retained by Mycelium servers is your Bitcoin address, nickname, sell orders with the entire location, with the entered location and your trade history. So, yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like they're actually getting the key. That sounds like you're just signing something.
They are getting the key.
To register.
No, they don't say signing. They say they use your Bitcoin private key for registration and authentication with their servers.
Yeah, like as in signing.
Yeah,
something.
that doesn't sound like that at all.
Okay, I'm not going to give them the benefit of the doubt, though. I'm not going to use it ever.
I do, because using it for authentication is... Yeah, you give them the public key and then you authenticate yourself.
Okay, but they don't say signing. They just say they use your private key. So who knows what that means?
That's like that's so implicitly like signing something. That's how you would authenticate with a key.
No, I mean, I'm sorry, I don't consider that. Like, this is something that they should be very, very clear about what they're doing with your private key, and otherwise, like, I'm not interested. Like, that I consider that to be a security risk until it's proven otherwise.
But they do. They're authenticating with it. Authenticating with a cryptographic key is you give me the public key and then sign something.
No, they say private key, and they don't, and they say they send the private key to the servers. They don't say signing.
Where do they say that, though?
They don't say signing. They say they use your private key to authenticate with their servers. That is the exact quote.
Yes, and you authenticate with a private key by sending the public key and then signing something.
But they don't say that. They just say they use your private key, and that is unclear.
Authenticate. That's what authenticating with a private key is.
No. There are a bunch of different interpretations of that sentence.
All right. Well, This sounds like a debate a little bit later for the Mumble or something, and we got a time constraint here. Like we've been getting a little bit into the weeds, so let's see if I could just keep moving us forward with a update on what's going on with Zap. So we know Jack Mallers has been working hard on the Zap wallet and at different capacities. He's been making strides in increased efficiencies and creating some of the best UI UX in the space. Well, just a couple of days ago, Jack announced the Zap Desktop 0.4.0 beta. Jack says, quote, "You may not recognize Zap this time around. We have completely redesigned the channel UI, added better support for third-party integration, improved error handling, allow advanced users to help test mainnet neutrino, and much more," close quote. In the blog post, he continues and says, "One of the biggest takeaways from this update is the quality of work being developed at such a breakneck pace. The amount of activity in the LN Zap Git repo has been more active in the past 4 months than it has been in its entire history. Right now, the Zap desktop wallet has nearly 3,400 commits and has 43 active contributors, with even more active testers and bug reporters. The amount of bug reports has gone down significantly from 0.3.4 to this release, which is making Zap more stable than ever. All right, let's take a look at what upgrades are here with this release. The channel UI management has become a lot more sleek and useful, with the recognition that users don't pay much attention to channels and usually elect to use autopilot. So the first move was to drop the intimidating channel UI from previous builds. All that specific information didn't get totally dropped, just reorganized to where it's placed inside the app for more advanced users. It's also been cleaned up to where all relevant data is easy to process. Zap has also reworked the flow for creating channels. Now you are presented with a suggest nodes list where you can move through some of the better known routing nodes. Of course, there remains the functionality to search the network or paste in a URI and open a channel with anyone you want. Then they also greatly improved their channel forms with added features like the ability for users to customize their fees. Now, another thing they've been working on is improved and hardened onboarding. They added better support for remote nodes with LND Connect, edit node settings, file selection for remote node connections, and more. Lastly, they added an opt-in mainnet neutrino option, which allows advanced users to run Zap neutrino on mainnet with no remote node setup required. Jack says this was a debated topic in the Zap community, saying, quote, "This feature is intended for advanced users and developers. When selecting mainnet, Zap gives you a highlighted warning letting you know you may lose funds and urges users to use testnet. There are many known issues with neutrino as it stands today, and the features like watchtowers and channel backups have yet to land in LND. This is strictly for testing, bug reporting, and iterating on the user experience for mainnet LN neutrino clients. Users electing to use neutrino on mainnet may lose money." And that part's all in bold, but that's the end of the quote. One more thing is Zap 0.4.0 implements a much better handling of error messages, making it easier for these testers to report potential bugs. You could download this new update from the LN Zap desktop repo. And a last statement from Jack on this release, he says, quote, "The overall stability and general improvements in this release are a direct reflection of the growing number of testers, contributors, and community members. Thank you," close quote. So if you want to get moving with your Lightning channels and have a great new UI doing it, check out the LN Zap Desktop 0.4.0 beta release and get going out there, because it looks like, can use, we got a lot of people working on it, but the more the better. This open source stuff is great. Get everybody's eyes on it. So what do you guys think of this release and, better UIs in Lightning?
Yeah, UI is definitely one of the most important things to get shit working on this. And Jack has been fucking kicking ass at this like the whole way around. Like and even not just on the user wallet side, like the entire app he built out for point of sale stuff that can run on a phone. Like he is like really taking all of this shit seriously in terms of like presenting the user with something that works and that, most importantly, they can actually make sense of.
Yeah, I mean, base layer Bitcoin mechanics is already pretty complicated. People are always worried about what they're doing is right, and Lightning is the same way. So having good UI and making it a good user experience, it's awesome. And I mean, like you're saying, with the point of sale, and there's lots of stuff being developed there in L and Zap. So lots of good stuff there. Do you guys have a comment, Nopara, Janine?
No, sorry, I was looking at my Selenium's code on GitHub, and actually I found that what they are doing. But go ahead, I will explain it later.
All right. If there's no more comment, go right into this update. So we got an update from a story we covered back in spring of 2018. I tried to dig through our old episodes to find which one it was where we covered this, but couldn't due to time constraints. I mean, it's in there somewhere and around this time last year. But anyway, now it's been announced that Yahoo has a 40% stake in the Japanese cryptocurrency exchange Taotao, formerly BitArg. That stake cost the company around $19 million, and the purchase was made through Yahoo's subsidiary company Z Corporation. Taotao has the seal of approval from the self-regulatory body of the Japanese Virtual Currency Exchange Group, which is that 16 separate exchanges. We covered just recently how that group had decided to limit margin trading at 2 to 4 times the initial deposit. And speaking of, Taotao will offer margin trading for Litecoin, BCH, and XRP. Curious about people saying they're going to list Bcash. What do they mean now? So anyway, the exchange will offer trades in BTC, ETH, LTC, BCH, and XRP. Right now, there is a pre-registration open from March 25th to April 17th, and the exchange is set to open for business around mid-May. So it looks like it's possible this SRO and more regulatory clarity has helped encourage big traditional players from the tech sector like Yahoo to set up shop there in Japan. And I'm kind of curious about this. They say Bcash, Bitcoin Cash. I guess they're going to list BABC, but we'll see. And so that's what's going on an update with Yahoo. What do you guys think about Yahoo building out an exchange?
Is Yahoo still around?
Right.
I mean, it's honestly like it's getting to the point where like the exchange market in Japan is pretty saturated. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how this does, but like it's getting to be a tall order in that market, I think, to start a new exchange and actually start building up enough liquidity that you're actually, going to keep attracting new users. But
yeah, for sure, it's a fight there. There's a lot of, like you're saying, I mean, there's 16 exchanges that are, well regulated enough to where they can say they're in this SRO. And so it'll probably just getting their feet in there. I mean, 40% stake in this exchange, just getting some experience, maybe trying to make a comeback. Like Nopar said, like, what is Yahoo up to nowadays? I mean, pretty sure I got an old Yahoo email account, but that's about, I don't even think I've used it in like a year. So, yeah. All right, you guys are all into this, like, how does Mycelium handle your keys? Let's talk about some people that messed up the key exposure at their security apparatus here.
And you know what? Let's do it for final thoughts. This is going to be my final thought.
It'll be
the next story.
Yeah, I mean, let's just get this done and deal with it, or it's just going to be a distraction the whole rest of the show.
Okay, so it looks like they do something like get the private key, and if the private key null, then return false, and this is the login function. So if the private key null, then they don't log in. Okay. And then this is the interesting part. There is something, a static class API utils, and this does something strange generate UUID hash signature. So it is generates with some signature, and the inputs are the private key and the session ID. So this generates a SIG hash session ID, but from this SIG hash session ID, you cannot get back your private key. And everything that happens from here on happens with this SIG hash session ID. So, and this is what they later add in the next session to the login parameters, and they send the login parameters to their server. So this SIG hash session ID is kind of a hash session ID with the private key. I'm not sure exactly what it does, but I am sure you cannot get back the private key from this, and this is what gets transferred to the server. So
yeah, it's just signing. It's
they
like
don't
signing.
send.
Yes, I understand that, but the language could be interpreted and should be rewritten. Right now, it can be interpreted as they could potentially send the private key to their server. That's how I would read it. That's how a normal person would read it. And yes, you can go look in the code and see, okay, they just generate a signature and that's what they're doing. And they're using the signature, not the private key. They're using the signature for the authentication. The private key generates the signature in addition to the session ID, but they're saying use the private key. So
you're right. It's okay. That makes sense. So it's a hash session ID, and that's what's being signed. Okay, so they get the session ID from the server, they sign it with their private key, and that SIG hash session ID, what they send back, that's the okay. You're
yes,
right.
but they should have rewritten that passage to say that they use your signature to authenticate and part of the registration process. Right now, it's poorly written, and anyone could interpret it as they send the private key to their servers.
But like Booger Guy says, and like I was thinking, I mean, Janine's not wrong. So, I mean, like, usually correct on some things. And I mean, if they need to rewrite the language to where it better describes the actual mechanics behind the system, then they should be looking into that. So, yeah, let's talk about some other guys that aren't doing necessarily the right thing with the keys. So, surprise, surprise, we have another exchange hack. This time it's this time around it's the Singapore-based exchange DragonEx, who says they've been hacked. Although right now there's not many details that have been released. That's all they're sort of saying. An announcement from the company stated, quote, on March 24th, DragonEx has encountered attacks from hackers. Our users' crypto assets and platform crypto assets were transferred and stolen, close quote. They say part of the assets have been retrieved, and they will do their best to retrieve the remaining assets. They are already taking responsibility for the hack and the loss to their users. They've reached out to the judicial administrations in Estonia, Thailand, Singapore, and Hong Kong to assist in the investigation. They also shared via Telegram 20 wallet addresses that contain the hacked funds in hopes that the community will also help track and retrieve these stolen assets. That link is in the show notes for those curious and want to dig a little deeper. We're supposed to hear more details from DragonEx in the coming days regarding this hack. I'm really curious what they mean when they say they're taking responsibility. I wonder if they're taking the financial loss or they are just acknowledging the fact that they had weak infrastructure. Either way, it reminds me a lot of the recent Cryptopia hack in New Zealand, where we didn't hear many details about the hack while law enforcement investigated the matter. And now they are finishing up their investigation, and the funds that were recoverable have been recovered. We are still seeing large social losses. So, yeah, just some early indications of something bad going on in this Singapore-based exchange. DragonEx looks like they're going to be down for a little while trying to recover these funds. But do you guys have any comment on this?
Another day in crypto.
DragonEx is an awesome name.
Yeah, I like the name too. Okay. Well, this looks like this will be the last one I'm running in this series of stories. So let's just push through this.
Let's go to the moon.
Yeah, looks like Bitcoin ATMs to the moon. The demand is up, and yeah, it's expected to moon, according to a new report from Knowledge Sourcing Intelligence, LLC. These guys write up reports on different subjects across multiple industries and then sell them. I tried going to the source on this report, and it cost nearly a whole Bitcoin. So this is just secondary reporting here. But the report is called, quote, Global Crypto ATM Market Forecast from 2019 to 2014. And the highlight of the report says that the industry made around $18.5 million last year in 2018 and has an expected 46.6% compound annual growth rate to reach around $184.7 million by 2024. Some more key takeaways from the report are that North America and Europe currently hold a large share of the market, but over the forecasted period, we are expected to see a rise from the Asia Pacific region. This is expected based on a growth of disposable income and the popularity of cryptocurrencies. The growth in the cryptocurrency ATM market is from a myriad of reasons, but the biggest hurdle is the regulatory compliance aspect. Right now, this market mirrors everything else we see, where there are different jurisdictions who are drafting legislation to either favor or oppose the market. And yeah, there are some areas of the U.S. where the ATM market has really blossomed in the past year, like Chicago, New York, and New Jersey, as well as areas in Switzerland and the U.K. These blooming areas are due to their close proximity to market makers and people who already have disposable income. I'd say cryptocurrency popularity is probably on par or maybe even a little more so in the Asia Pacific region. I'm not sure. I still need to visit out there. But if they could just continue to see growth in people investing in the market with disposable income, that area could take off. Reality is this could happen in many different regions where the ATM market is currently not that large. But this will be a growth that happens in accordance with people's economic abilities and necessities on top of the popularity of the ecosystem. Anyway, so yeah, it looks like Bitcoin ATMs to the moon. I've just I've had some looking for Bitcoin ATMs recently. It is something to try and get a hold of one of these machines. They are in demand. And like I've been looking for one, and it's like likely I could maybe get one by the end of this year. So yeah, it looks like they are, in high demand, and it's going to grow.
The Bitcoin ATM market is really risky. When I was in university, my classmate came to me and told me to let's launch a Bitcoin ATM. Let's build one and launch it. And we went to places, and they gave us a very bad outlook of the future because there are a bunch of ATMs out there already. So it really takes 1 second, one drunk CEO of someone to say, okay, from now on we're gonna do Bitcoin too, and you are out of business just like that. So it's risky,
Yeah, it's definitely got its risk associated with it. I mean, I've been looking into it, like I said, and for sure, a lot of people are just, yeah, the compliance issue is one of the main things where they're like, we can handle this or you can handle this, but really the compliance side, and you got to have somebody operate the cash side of things. If they got to come and get the cash. Are you going to do the buy and sell? You just going to do the buy? Like, there's a bunch of different stuff there whenever you're looking at jumping in that market. And then for sure, the machinery, there's just the hardware and all that. There's even this whole other aspect of it.
My Bitcoin ATMs would accept zero confirmation. we trust in our customers.
Yeah, I saw some that were doing one conf, and I was like, I don't know if I'd even accept one conf, man. Maybe double, but yeah, there's like as fast as this market's growing, so are the people that understand it and are willing to try and find a way to take advantage of it. we covered
not
that.
to be nitpicky, but one conf is more than enough.
All right. Well then, yeah, one conf better than zero conf. So what's going on with these Weiss cryptocurrency ratings? These guys are back at it again. I hadn't seen them in a minute. They a little bit more relevant with their ratings this time around?
Oh, no, absolutely not. Yeah, they're back in the news because what they have to say is definitely not worth listening to, and they are a complete laughingstock in both the traditional financial space and cryptocurrencies, which is why people pay attention to them, because it's just hilariously stupid. And they have apparently updated their terrible ratings recently. They are just as terrible, if not worse, than the first round. And in terms of their overall rating, which they claim the overall rating takes into account the, quote, risk of loss and reward. Weiss has determined that the best digital asset overall is EOS, and then XRP/Ripple, then Bitcoin, followed by Binance Coin, Litecoin, and Ethereum. In terms of their rating specific, and keep in mind, that was a rating that took into account the risk of loss, and they still think EOS and XRP are better than Bitcoin. In terms of their rating specifically for, I assume they mean tech quality, it's just listed as tech/adoption. The list is XRP, EOS, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Cardano, and Steam. XRP, EOS, and Bitcoin now have A grades, and everything below that has B, C, D, etc. So yeah, that's pretty ridiculous, because even in an interview with the Next Web, or Hard Fork, which is at the Next Web, one of the people from Weiss acknowledged the fact that they tried to take into account decentralization, but they didn't know how to define it, and it didn't bother them in terms of the rating that EOS has fewer controlling parties than 21. I don't know what they mean by controlling parties. I assume they mean validators. But yeah, that's pretty awful. And this is just a joke. Once again, I don't understand it.
I just today saw that EOS is Bitcoin's 3.0, which is interesting because I didn't know. What is 2.0 then? In fact, what is 1.0? Bitcoin didn't even reach 1.0 yet. So
I mean, I believe the marketing with Ethereum was that it was Bitcoin 2.0, and then if EOS is Ethereum 2.0, that makes it Bitcoin 3.0 or something. I don't know. It's stupid.
Sounds like that. Yeah, ridiculous. Getting lost in where's Web 3 and when was where are we at now? Because yeah, everybody wants to go to this next level without really thinking about where we just came from. We're just moving so quick. This is crazy though, like you're saying, EOS and XRP. You know, I remember when this first came out, I think they ranked Bitcoin as like number 9 or something. It was like way down the list. So I guess it's at least good to see them up here.
It's I believe it graduated from, so it graduated from a C rating. I think it was a C minus, and now it's a B minus in the overall rating. So there's nothing with an A minus or A in the overall rating, but there are A's in terms of the tech and adoption grade, which doesn't make any sense to me, because literally if you are going around on the street, the number of people who even know what EOS or Ripple are is extremely low compared to the number of people who have at least heard of Bitcoin and maybe even own some Bitcoin without knowing too much. Like, you have to know a bit more about cryptocurrencies. You have to be a bit more involved to even come across the other ones. Like, you have to actually
know what EOS is.
I don't know what it is either. Apparently, according to the Next Web article, I mean, I don't trust what Consensus says, but according to a study by Consensus, which is like funny because obviously they're most of the money behind Ethereum, so that's a giant conflict of interest. But their report said that EOS was a glorified cloud computing service. Which
what was this? What was this Ethereum Foundation or Consensus or what you're talking about?
So it just says that blockchain researchers commissioned by Ethereum powerhouse Consensus investigated the EOS blockchain thoroughly with a rigid set of tests to benchmark its underlying technology. the published results were pretty damning, and they said it was a glorified cloud computing service.
Nice. So I just want to note quickly that in my investigation later, I'm going to discredit a huge claim that Consensus is saying. So yeah, just gonna tie it back.
You think that, I mean, if anything that Consensus could possibly be wrong about, I wouldn't say this is one of the things that they're wrong about.
Yeah, I mean, it's their direct competitor, right? Is EOS. I mean, it's like, I'm here where there are a lot of Ethereum guys, and like the first real competitor that I saw them kind of get worried about was EOS, where they were like, oh man, now who are these guys?
Yeah, and I assume that EOS is the reason that Vitalik had some kind of breakdown on Laura Shin's podcast. I have to look at that because I have to.
Gosh, so I was watching something from Vitalik the other day. I was just like, how can anybody listen to this guy? I don't know. I just get frustrated with the like stuttering speeches and everything. So yeah. So there's the Weiss ratings. What's going on with looks like I've been seeing a bunch of Twitter bias ratings. Like people are getting rated on their bias in the crypto community with some new extension. Pretty bad. What's going on right now?
Yeah, so I think it came up last year. There was a website that went up that was called initially cryptoinfluencers.io, and all it did was I mean, we talked about it before on the show, I don't remember which one, where it talked about it basically made these rankings for Twitter accounts related to Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, and then like initially I think it started with just cryptocurrencies in general, and then it kind of branched into like who's focused around Bitcoin, who's focused around Ethereum, and then it's since branched into probably Ripple and others. But what has happened recently is, I think this was May 25th as well, a guy named Luke Childs took the service Crypto Influencers is now called Hive.one. And so he took that API and he made a browser extension that actually displays what he calls biases on crypto Twitter. And I think currently it's Bitcoin, Ethereum, Ripple, and Bitcoin Cash. So basically when you have this browser extension installed and you're on Twitter, I think there's different displays, but the main one is that on your a person's profile, it will show like bars where if you're mostly Bitcoin focused, then your bar will be a percentage full based on how much you focus on Bitcoin or Ethereum or Ripple or Bitcoin Cash. And so I guess it's just a way of someone who comes across a Twitter profile to easily discern which one you're most likely to be in favor of. Obviously, you know, this is a new thing and he says he's going to tweak it because it's hard to obviously distinguish, you know, someone just mentioning Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc., and actually feeling positively about it, or maybe they're making sarcastic jokes. So obviously he'll have to keep tweaking it, but so far it seems to be relatively accurate, I would say. For example, he did a screenshot of Brian Armstrong's profile, and it has him basically at 0 for Bitcoin now. Then I'd say 25% for Ethereum, nothing for Ripple, and then 60-70% Bitcoin Cash on the status bar. So, and then obviously a bunch of Bitcoin developers and stuff are entirely, if not mostly, Bitcoin. And then obviously like people like Roger Ver are all Bitcoin Cash, which isn't entirely accurate because, I mean, he obviously invests into a bunch of things, but maybe he just doesn't talk about them all positively on Twitter, so it doesn't register. I mean, obviously he degrades Bitcoin, but he still owns a lot of it apparently. Yeah, so I think it's interesting because I don't know, do you guys think it's more useful than having the ranking that Hive.one has, which is just who is the most popular or influential? I mean, I think that's probably one of the more sophisticated rankings for Twitter accounts, but I think the one about biases is more interesting, even though it's probably going to be harder to discern.
I think it's completely broken. Like it's I forget what percentage, but it's showing Mr. Hodl as like a huge XRP show, and it's like that's like whatever metric it's using is just like completely inaccurate.
Oh, it does? Because when I looked at, I thought he shared his profile and it was Bitcoin. Did it break or something?
Well, I think there's a few different forces that's running around. Because yeah, I thought I saw him show his was 100% Bitcoiner. Well, there's this Fort Wiz version where it does like your follower count of whether or not you're following Bitcoiners or shitcoiners, and that one. And I mean, I've seen one where you're labeled like a little bit Bcash Shinobi, but I guess that's because like something's in your bio. I mean, I think it would be a little bit more useful than, rating influencers and saying this is who you should listen to. I mean, just show people's bias and then you figure out who to listen to.
I think at this point it's really fun, but I would be cautious because this company seems to know what the shit they are doing, and we might have a Facebook situation. And also there might be some shadiness there. I remember a long time ago I clicked on their analytics tool, and then they told me, okay, I have to connect my Twitter account to access their analytics tool. Okay, what the heck? So I connected it, and then after you connect your Twitter account, oh, you are on the waiting list. You can skip the line and get access right away with referral links. So I didn't give anyone a referral link, and then I'm still on the waiting list, right? So I think it's just a scam because I did it a very, very long time ago. Okay. So anyway, let's be cautiously optimistic about it. It's really fun now. It's a fun thing to have it.
Yeah, I mostly think it's funny. I don't think I would actually. I mean, if I wanted to, it wouldn't take me that long if I was wanting to know what project someone was mostly interested in or mostly talked about. I would just do a quick search of their tweets. I probably wouldn't use this algorithm to make any kind of like actionable decision about somebody. So
Yeah, like Nopart saying though, it's pretty fun. I've seen some funny stuff out there with different older Bitcoiners, like people that used to be Bitcoiners and now they're like this thing is actually sort of attributing where they should go. But yeah, I saw somebody say they needed to add a no coiner metric. I mean, that would be a good way to make sure that you just sort of, I mean, if you scan somebody and they don't really have anything to say about anything, they could be put in this no coiner side of things.
I think for that they would have to scan the whole Twitter, right? Like everyone's account on Twitter. That would be really hard.
Yeah. So for sure, everybody is a no coiner except this little small group of people that yell at each other a lot. All right. So, all right.
Well,
Yeah,
really quick. I mean, I don't a no coiner label would only be useful if it was someone who, repeatedly did commentary on cryptocurrencies, but was mostly degrading about it or had no, interest in actually owning any. So like, because if I just came across a random person who just like, they weren't interested in cryptocurrencies because they either, didn't know about them or just weren't interested in that subject area, that's different from a person who what's her name? Frances Coppola, who writes articles all the time about it, but obviously thinks that they're all scams, and that's a different quality.
Yeah, that's interesting too, but that's not no coiner. That's do we have a phrase for that, anti-coiner or something like that?
I think that is no coiner. These guys that are just from the traditional spot that think like, oh, I can comment on it. Like, yeah, Francis Capella, Rubini, Amir.
To my understanding, no coiner is someone who is not a coiner, right? Not an anti-coiner. Anyway, I'll look it up later.
Yeah, we need an anti-coiner. We'll see who's in that field. I think these next guys would be there. You want to take us into what this Bank of International Settlements guy wants to tell us?
Mm-hmm. So Augustin Karstens, the general manager at the BIS, is now pretty much stepping out and making explicit warnings against central banks issuing their own cryptocurrencies. And I mean, this is, something we've talked about quite a lot every time it came up, but it's also something really that most central banks in the developed world, at least, have kind of come to this conclusion on their own, the more that they look at things. But it completely just upends the entire structure that the legacy financial system works on, and it introduces way too many variables that just completely stop the system from functioning how it's supposed to be. And like two of the biggest concerns that Karsten's brought up was, for instance, let's say you have a bunch of central bank digital currencies and a financial panic happens. Well, wouldn't most people want to move into the currency, the accounts effectively offered directly by the central bank to try and protect themselves from any market chaos? And what are the effects that's going to have? It's going to drain liquidity from everything, from equities markets, from financial institutions, which is going to draw them way under their reserve requirements for outstanding, assets or money that they have floating around there. Like what's the implications for monetary policy? Like now it's just it completely makes the financial system as it's structured nowadays impossible to work. Like it just everything that happens right now, it would no longer create the same consequences. Like financial institutions would not have the same tools available to deal with things. And like there's only a handful of central banks in the world that are even considering doing something like this, let alone actually seeing themselves do it in the near future. But I think that this statement from the Bank of International Settlement is really going to kind of solidify that attitude, just because something like Bitcoin in and of itself potentially presents a huge like X variable for the financial system to react to the bigger it grows, that you can't really attempt to control. So why on earth would central banks effectively create their own X variable that would, by the very nature of being issued by a central bank, expand faster, integrate into things faster, when it completely undermines their at least stated goal of maintaining stability in the economy? Like it's just not a rational thing to do if your goal actually is to keep the economy functioning smoothly and remaining stable. Like the only real benefit to a token like that would be being able to force negative interest rates after removing cash, or just instituting more systems of control. Like it in no way would help keep the economy functioning in a stable way. It would actively destabilize it. And I think like this is one of those final signals that's going to put a kibosh on this entire idea, except in places where countries want to institute something like this specifically for those increased measures of control.
Yeah, these guys are always going to try and search for a way to make sure that they can get their hands into this ecosystem and try to control it like the traditional areas. And, we talked about this in the past, how, eventually they try to issue their own coin. And it's just, yeah, I mean, at least they're acknowledging the fact that wouldn't really do anything to help their position. And, yeah, so Bank of International Settlements, at least they understand that aspect of it.
What if their position is that they want less responsibility? So that's why they issue semi-public, semi-centralized cryptocurrency, because they wouldn't have to manage the money supply that much.
But they would. They would. That's like the whole point, Nopar, is like this would make more responsibility for them. Like if a central bank did something like this, why would I get an account with Chase when I can just directly hold the central bank token in the equivalent of an account from the central bank? Like why would anybody risk depositing large sums of money for dealing with like collateral for debt, like investing into equities, like loaning out for interest? Why would anybody go to any commercial bank for that when they can just go directly to the central bank through a central bank crypto token? Like they wouldn't. Like it would destroy the entire private financial sector and would put all of the responsibility for functions and services like that on the head of the central bank. Like this would drastically increase the things they're responsible for. It wouldn't lessen them.
Well, so imagine this. We have miners in Bitcoin because we cannot really decide on what the state of the ledger should be. So, and the miners are not going to collude with each other to make sure the state of the ledger will be what they want it to be. So let's say a bunch of central banks or big banks or big entities come together who mutually who don't like each other, and and so they maintain the same role as the miners do in our system. I don't think that's so far-fetched in theory. I think that's like undoable in practice, but in theory, I think that's not that stupid.
But it really is in theory, because how do you like where does the money from that? Where does the revenue go? Like now there's no stability in competition. It just gets sliced up. Like all that would really be doing is taking the central bank and spreading it around a little more and still dumping more responsibility on them collectively.
Yeah, but you are assuming that all central bankers are going to just want to print money. But I could imagine some central bankers who would rather just give the responsibility to someone else, or to no one, so to say, to distribute this responsibility of creating money, because it's not that popular, right?
Well, I mean, central banks really only indirectly do that now. Like when you're talking strictly speaking, it's a commercial bank does that when they issue a loan. But like that's the point. Like the commercial banks bank with the central bank. They have their reserve limits. They issue debt to make more money. There's a whole chain of how this works and stays somewhat stable. When you introduce a central bank crypto token into that, you destabilize everything. Like all it takes,
wasn't already destabilized.
It's pretty unstable now, but it's not completely exploding. If tomorrow I can take my money out of Chase and go put it in the central bank cryptocurrency, which the central bank guarantees absolutely for everything, and I go do that, and everybody and their mom goes and does that, what happens now? All of these banks have loans. They have loans floating out there. And now all of their reserves are disappearing and going into the central bank.
But you're switching topics here, because you have to see the worst case scenario. You have to find some the most desperate central banks, where they are really destabilized, and where the central banksters might want to reduce the responsibility more, right? It's just, you just have to find one or two or three.
But that's my point,
the theory
is they're not reducing responsibility. Like right now, they set interest rates and they act as a lender of last resort. If you do something like this, they are now the lender. They don't lend out when you absolutely have to, just to keep this thing from going bankrupt. They're now the source of all loans.
But that's
on their balance sheet instead of on the balance sheet of private banks that account with them, that they act as a lender of last resort to. Like, there's no way to do something like this where they get less responsibility. They get more. Like, that's why almost none of them are going to do this.
But that's already a form of less responsibility, right? Because what's the alternative? The alternative is outright printing money, outright quantitative easing. So basically, lending loans to commercial banks is already a reduced responsibility.
Yeah, but that's my point, is making a token doesn't reduce that more. It increases it.
But because if they would make a token in a way that in order to print more money, a bunch of banks would have to collude, that would make them not be able to print money, so they wouldn't be able to lend money to commercial banks, which would reduce their responsibility.
No, it wouldn't. Like, if everybody will leave commercial banks if they can get that kind of guarantee.
Okay.
All right. Yeah. I mean, like, I was just going to let you guys hash that out because, I mean, yeah, I think for sure they want less responsibility. But, yeah, why don't you just take us into what they can do, I guess.
Well, a professor or the head of research, actually, regarding blockchains at the London School of Economics, gave a interview with Forbes where he is talking very seriously about the potential of central banks buying small amounts of Bitcoin in the near future as part of their reserves. And I mean, the biggest part of why he's really considering this is just because of how it functions in terms of a use case right now. Like, Bitcoin is mostly just the analog of digital gold right now. It's not really stable enough to be a means of transaction in any serious way because of the volatility. It's absolutely not stable enough to be a unit of account right now. And it's growing pretty much more and more mature over time as a store of value. And I mean, ultimately, like, this is the kind of thing that you pad your balance sheet with in this position as a central bank. And especially given just the small size and just constant history of adoption and growth Bitcoin has shown, for a central bank to get in now, you're really looking at a massive potential uproom and not that much loss if you really don't overextend yourself in terms of what that could actually be worth in the long term. I mean, allocating a few tens of millions of dollars now could easily turn into billions in the future if things actually grow and are successful in the way that a lot of people in this space think that it will be. And, you know, one of the big reasons he's actually looking at this as something viable is just how the market has historically reacted to regulation. I mean, a lot of us in this space are not very fond of it, but it's kind of hard to deny that the more regulatory regimes set up around the world have popped up, like the market has reacted positively most of the time. Like, we've seen price appreciation in response to that. We've seen a growing stability and maturity to the overall market. And even just the CME and the CBOE launching cash settled futures for this, like, that is a huge signal in terms of the legacy system recognizing this as a legitimate thing, not treating it as just a tool for criminals or something that should not be allowed. It's there are products based on Bitcoin trading on some of the biggest financial markets in the world. And when you really look at all of this, like, it's not that crazy to consider something like this happening in the next 5 years or so. A very small hedge could give a lot of padding for central bank, balance sheets if you really look at the potential uproom and just the overall history of growth in this space. And I mean, ultimately how Bitcoin continues growing and get integrated into things, it's not any one person's, in any one person's control. Like, the market and all of the participants in that market, whether you like them or not, are going to look at it and assess it and decide whether or not they want to actually use Bitcoin and how they want to use it. And at the end of the day, this is a use case for it that there are a lot of rational reasons for looking at it in a serious way.
Yeah, I think this is much more something to where if they actually did want to participate in the crypto and Bitcoin economy, and something that they could actually do that's useful is, just stockpile a little bit of reserves, but small amounts for central banks. Yeah, we'll see what their idea of small amounts are. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they've been doing this quietly for a while now that we've been sort of around this price range that we've been at. All right. Any more comment?
I would buy Bitcoin 3.0 instead.
Wrecked.
He wasn't wrecked for me.
No, I meant he'd be wrecked buying Bitcoin 3.0.
No.
All right. So tell us about Bitcoin 3.0, Adam.
All right. I'm not going to tell you about Bitcoin 3.0, but I'm going to tell you about blockchain.
All right.
Actually, I'm not going to tell you about blockchain, but Ethereum. And this is going to be really interesting, or at the very least, educational, because I was reading Richard Jandal Brown's blog post, latest blog post, and it was kind of nostalgic experience to when I was a blockchain engineer and was reading his blog at the time and trying to come up with anything blockchain related. I did not succeed, so that's why I'm developing on Bitcoin now, because blockchain didn't really work out as I was hoping. But anyway, Richard Jandal Brown is the former executive architect for industry innovation and business development for IBM. That's a long title. And the current CTO of R3, which we all know it's the big blockchain company that a bunch of big banks came together and put a lot of money into it. You want to say something?
Well, just that R3 is not a blockchain company. They very clearly said 2 years ago that they're a distributed ledger or blockchain-inspired distributed ledger company.
True. Actually, that's true. Yeah. How you frame it. Okay, Corda is the main product, by the way, whatever that's doing. So he was talking about Ethereum and why Ethereum is a bad choice for business. As Bitcoiners, we all know that Ethereum is a bad choice for currency, but we don't really know why it's a bad choice for business. So I think it's an interesting perspective to see. Why Ethereum is a good choice for business? There are 3 arguments for that. First, go where the skills and innovations are. Second, use Ethereum or Ethereum virtual machine to inherit innovation of open source developers. Third, public chains are more secure and more immutable than private ones. So what he's saying here is that first and second argument was debunked a long time ago, but the third has just been debunked not that long time ago. What was the first one? Ethereum has many developers, so you should build stuff on that too. And then why Ethereum people claim that they have many developers? Consensus claims the Ethereum developer community has 250,000 developers, which is that's how many developers Ethereum has. So 250,000 guys. Yep.
I mean, it's one of those hilarious statistics again, because like, for example, Consensus, I think they've obviously fired a lot of people in the last year, but at one point, I think they had like 2,000 employees, 1 or 2,000 employees, which was more than the daily active users they had for any of their dApps combined. Yes, so for them to say that there's 250,000 Ethereum developers, it's like you don't even have like over 5,000 daily active users of Ethereum dApps. So like, what are these people building?
Yes, you are completely right, and that's what he goes into to debunk this. This claim is based on how many people downloaded the Ethereum developer tools, and they just halved that number for, I don't know, because that's their
That's bad.
And then he gave a similarity to this to Java, to the Java ecosystem. There were 250 million Java developer tool downloads in 2017. So halving that means there must be 125 million Java developers. Except that we know exactly that there are 12 million Java developers. So that number really doesn't add up like that logic. Okay, so another concern with this is that how many of these Ethereum developers can really write, secure code, because you can write shit code in Java, it's gonna work, and your website is gonna work or something like that. But Ethereum is different. You cannot write unsecure code, because then there is a DAO, and then everything is going to just explode. Okay, the second claim was that you benefit from the Ethereum innovation. And then he rephrases this argument that even if you have correctly determined that your public Ethereum network is wrong for you, you should still use Ethereum toolset for your private projects. So I think that's pretty convincing argument against it with this rephrasing. Okay, and another note is that Ethereum technologies are constantly being abandoned, leaving businesses at risk of technology dead ends. This was the debunking of the second argument, and now the third. What is public chains are more secure, and then he says that except the Ethereum style public chains, as it was demonstrated by the Ethereum Classic 51% attack. The idea of building on Ethereum in order to securely anchor private blockchains to a public chain is now discredited. And that's about it. And his conclusion, be in no doubt, blockchains for enterprise is real and it is here to stay. But if you are doing it on Ethereum, you are doing it wrong. So what do you think of this?
I think he's about right on.
I mean, like, there's there's always going to be use for more controlled shit on a blockchain, but just not things completely like centrally controlled. I mean, like look at something like Liquid. Like that is a distributed platform for things that ultimately rely on trust. And it does improve security to a degree by distributing it, but ultimately like you're just doing that for accounting purposes. Like putting the same kind of assets that you would on Liquid onto Bitcoin, it doesn't do anything. Like if I issue something as equity in a company I do, like having that on the Bitcoin blockchain, it doesn't mean anything. Like if I know you're breaking a law, I'm just going to go, your share doesn't matter anymore. Or I'm not going to pay you dividends. Or it's still based on trust. Like in that situation, it's just an accounting mechanism. It doesn't actually like solve anything like a native token like Bitcoin does, where that is the thing itself that is the source of value.
Well, it's just like something that I've noticed, like being so close here. I mean, I'm going to a blockchain meetup tonight because, I talk to these guys on a regular basis because that's just a lot of what's going on around here. And it does seem like they are kind of in these dead end areas where it's like they've been trying these different aspects to try and build out this part of the Ethereum ecosystem. And, they run into the same similar headaches and everything that goes on with trying to develop a blockchain, and you have value on there and you run into just some errors where, there's actual value loss. And it's just like Ethereum kind of just split up into all these different development paths, and, this whole 250,000 devs. I mean, that's just like, where do you place that label at? And, I mean, because I've certainly heard some discussions from some devs where it just didn't sound like they had a fundamental understanding of what was going on. And that has to be the case because, I mean, we know how small the Bitcoin development community is, and that's people that are actually fairly competent in the system. So, yeah.
250,000 devs, and apparently a block explorer for Ethereum can't even find someone else who has a full archive node.
Right. Like, what are they all building off of?
But it's good because blockchain analysis is hard, right?
Impossible.
It's like, wow, congratulations, Infura. Apparently you have 250,000 incoming connections.
What's crazy is like that I could tell you from firsthand is like people here, they don't see that as a problem. Like it's so crazy to me the way that they point towards different things. And like I've seen them be like, oh, well, Bitcoin mining is centralized. And it's like, yeah, there's like degrees of this. But, Infura, I mean, like in the way that they handle their node situation is like 100% centralized. And if this is all about accounting, that accounting is supposed to be built off people's ability to actually construct that archive of the way that it reached that conical order of where we're at today. And I mean, yeah, the way that they're going right now with some of the stuff that I've seen with this, I swear this create to function, I keep bringing it up, but I mean, it's like, there's no scarcity there. I mean, like the idea of it is just a joke at this point. I mean, we've seen it with, ETH, and now the way that they've split up a billion different ways, and, all these, I don't know, all these ICOs built on ERC20s. I mean, yeah, it's crazy. I don't know who's actually. I mean, this is where it's like we were saying earlier in this Weiss ratings, like EOS and this other guy XRP are up there. But I mean, I'll tell you this from this area I'm at right now is also Neo and Tron. Those guys are around here too.
So back to Rick's previous comments that your blockchain developer, Ethereum developer buddies are running out of gas. You see what I did there? This is trial and error process, right? I was trying to build something on the blockchain too. I would be okay with anything, but I miserably failed. So I realized that I have to work on Bitcoin instead and not trying this fancy bullshit, what's not working at all. So yeah, they have to figure it out themselves, and they will, and then they can come and build some real shit on Bitcoin. All right. Final thoughts?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Yeah. Final thoughts. I wanted to post this, man. Maybe you could post it to the chat and maybe in the show notes, just like let people know, because I've seen a bunch of people talking about 2x and the history of that. And that's Janine's write up from that whole important time in history. And there's a lot of source material in there. We know the way Janine does this reporting. So, yeah, check that out. Anybody that's wanting to look into the history of 2x and just another, yeah, go into that meetup tonight for the blockchain meetup and go visit your meetups. A lot of, built out kind of a network here in Colorado that's a little tight knit group. And unfortunately, yesterday I heard some news about one of our members falling really ill, and he's, trying to fight through some tough stuff right now. And just want to give a shout out to Sage and Tracy. My heart's with you. I hope everything turns out okay. And yeah, just go visit your meetups.
You need no para?
Well, my thing, I mean, you don't have to put it up, but obviously, if anyone was following me towards the end of last year and then you saw that big thread I made about the civil journalism on the blockchain project, yeah, it kind of failed. And then they're like, oh, we're going to try and redo the token sale, but it's going to be easier and we're going to have it on like a no deadline basis. And they're going to try to sell 30 million of them. Well, that has not exactly, I mean, I don't know if they've done any better, but usually you can tell how successful a project will be based on, a token sale. Like if you're not, like the majority of your sale will happen around the opening of the sale. And so they originally were supposed to relaunch the sale in February. There was no update in February, and then they decided to open it in March. And I haven't seen really any news about it whatsoever, but apparently they, as of the beginning of March, right after the sale, they had only sold about $300,000 worth of tokens, which is even less than they managed to sell in the previous sale, which they ended up refunding. And apparently 97% of those $300,000 worth of tokens were bought by a single person or single entity. So that's great.
Well, it's gaining a lot of respect in my mind at this point. Yeah.
No para.
Oh, I think my final thought was the fact that if you are working on something fancy and you don't really know what you're working on, but your project manager said that this blockchain product is going to work out just as well as they think, then don't believe them. Don't think that they know what they are doing, because chances are they don't. In fact, chances are they don't, because as we seen the research not that long ago, the success rate of blockchain projects is exactly 0. So just work on your shit and then come to Bitcoin when you're ready. When you failed miserably, you're not going to regret it. You already have the skills or some similar skills. Yeah, that's it.
All right. And I guess my last thought is everybody join me in trying to get blocked by the EU Parliament account on Twitter. And hopefully by Sunday, somebody will have won. Adios, everybody.
Later, everyone.